Welcome to today's Explainer. Today we are tackling an absolutely massive topic, demystifying Islam. Our goal here is completely objective. We're going straight to the direct source text to bridge that massive gap between common media portrayals and the actual documented teachings. So let's cut through the noise.
It's a genuine paradox, isn't it? I mean, Islam is approaching 2 billion adherents globally. That makes it the fastest-growing religion in the world. In fact, studies suggest it's actually going to surpass Christianity as the leading faith by 2070. Yet, despite those massive numbers, it just remains so heavily clouded by stereotypes and assumptions. So why the profound disconnect?
Okay, let's dive right into this. Here's our roadmap for today. 1. Why Islam is misunderstood. 2. Deconstructing common misconceptions. 3. The role of prophets. 4. Daily life and values. And 5. Historical testimonials.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, Why Islam is Misunderstood.
So, when you really dig into the factors creating this distorted lens, a few huge culprits jump right out. The media plays a massive role, right? They frequently focus on these sensationalized extremist minorities, which completely overshadows the peaceful majority. Add to that deep historical conflicts, complex political agendas, and a really major linguistic barrier. The primary text, the Quran, is in Arabic, meaning vital nuances get totally lost in Western translation. All these factors just combine to create this giant wall of misunderstanding.
And this leads us to a really fundamental but completely false assumption. Because Christianity centers on the worship of Jesus, people often assume Islam simply swapped in Prophet Muhammad. But the source texts are explicitly clear on this. Muslims do not worship Muhammad. He is deeply, deeply revered as a mortal messenger, for sure, but only God, Allah, is worthy of worship.
Moving right along to Section 2, Deconstructing Common Misconceptions.
A huge accusation you'll often hear leveled against Islam is that it's inherently sexist. But if you actually look at the text, the Quran in Surah 3 states absolute equality between males and females. What's really happening here is that regional cultural practices are getting completely tangled up with religious doctrine. For instance, extreme garments like the burqa are enforced by some local governments, but Islamic scholars broadly agree it's actually not mandated by scripture. The texts definitely encourage modest dress, like the hijab, but they do not command women to cover their faces. That is an absolutely crucial distinction between local culture and actual scripture.
Then, of course, there's the major misconception regarding violence. While extremist groups absolutely claim religious justification, which, creates widespread fear, the historical texts paint a totally different picture. Early Muslims faced extreme persecution and were actually initially commanded to refrain from violence altogether. When fighting was finally permitted, it was strictly regulated as self-defense, with rigid rules emphasizing justice and protecting civilians and property. In fact, one of the most significant historical events, the conquest of Mecca, was remarkably peaceful.
Honestly, far from the chaotic, violent images we're so used to seeing on the evening news, the true atmosphere cultivated by the faith is completely different. The Prophet's Mosque in Medina at dusk perfectly captures this reality. The foundational sites and the actual true practices of the religion are centered around profound peace, reflection, and community gathering.
Now for Section 3, the role of prophets.
To really grasp the faith, you kind of have to hear how Prophet Muhammad described his own role. He said, and I quote, "My similitude is that of a man who built and completed a house except for one missing brick. I am that brick, and I am the last of the prophets." I love that analogy. He didn't view himself as the founder of some brand new, disconnected religion, but rather the final puzzle piece in a very long line of divine messengers sent down to humanity.
And this whole final messenger concept leads to a surprisingly shared history. A huge myth out there is that Islam rejects Jesus. The reality? No way. Muslims actually revere Jesus as a major prophet of God. While they don't view him as divine or as the Son of God, and they believe he wasn't crucified but rather ascended to heaven unharmed, their deep respect for him as a miraculous messenger of monotheism is absolute.
Seeing a traditional minaret reaching up into the sky, which is a total architectural staple of the mosque, traditionally used for the call to prayer, serves as the perfect pivot point for us. Let's shift our focus away from ancient prophets and look at what everyday devotion actually looks like today. Section 4. Daily life and values.
Now, what's incredibly revealing here is that if you look at the actual titles of Friday khutbahs, those are the weekly sermons given at mosques, a very clear pattern emerges. you aren't going to find radical geopolitical agendas. Instead, you'll find themes like nourishment of the soul, contentment, rights of the elderly, and the status of the neighbor. The day-to-day focus of the faith is overwhelmingly on cultivating inner peace, social good, and really strong community bonds.
Let's just quickly dismantle a few more of those lingering everyday myths while we're at it. First up, physical cleanliness. Muslims perform regular ritual washing, called wudu, before their prayers. Second, integration. The data clearly shows the vast majority of Western Muslims strongly desire to fully integrate into their societies. And finally, polygamy. While technically permitted under super strict rules of absolute equality, in reality it is exceedingly rare and it's even outright outlawed in several majority Muslim countries.
All right, let's wrap things up with Section 5, Historical Testimonials.
Listen to this observation from Mahatma Gandhi. After extensively studying the Prophet's life, Gandhi stated he was convinced it was not the sword that won a place for Islam in those days. Instead, he admired the rigid simplicity, the absolute humbleness, and the absolute trust in God and in his own mission. Coming from literally history's greatest advocate for nonviolence, that is a profoundly powerful endorsement.
Similarly, the Scottish historian William Montgomery Watt pointed out something fascinating. He noted that Muhammad's readiness to undergo severe persecution for his beliefs, paired with the high moral character of the men who followed him, argues for his fundamental integrity. Basically, the exceptional character of the followers was a direct reflection of the sincerity of their leader.
And finally, the philosopher Thomas Carlyle just totally marvels at the sheer objective historical achievement here. He highlights how one man, single-handedly, could weld warring tribes and wandering Bedouins into a powerful, cohesive, and civilized nation in less than 2 decades. From a purely historical standpoint, it's just an undeniable turning point in human history.
And that brings us to the core reality. Beyond all the sensationalism and the endless stereotypes, the source texts reveal a religion fundamentally built on structure, mercy, community, and monotheism. So I want to leave you with this final thought. If the core teachings actually focus on inner peace, social justice, and personal character, how can we use better education, responsible media, and open interfaith dialogue to finally bridge the massive gap between the myths we see on our screens and the reality lived by 2 billion people? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking great questions, and I'll catch you next time.